In the very first verse of the book of Genesis, the author, Moses, introduces the main character of all of history, the book, and the whole Bible. It's God. And he does this with the first words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." God exists. He exists before anything was brought into existence. He made it. He owns it. He runs it. Everything that's seen, everything that's unseen, he's a pretty big deal. And humanity is very important to God. It's the crown jewel of creation. And as it turns out, humanity is the very important secondary character of Genesis and the Bible. So after an account of how everything was made, there are three big important plot points that happen right at the beginning of Genesis. The first is that God makes man and woman in his image, and he tells them to care for his creation. And the second big plot point is that they're warned that if they don't follow God's ways, the order of creation and the garden will be lost, and death in many forms is going to come right behind. The third big important establishing plot point here at the beginning is that we find out that God has made humanity to have a relationship with him forever. And all of this is obviously great. I mean, it's what humanity is made for. But then enter trouble. It shows up in the form of a duplicitous, manipulative, spiritual personality represented by a snake. And it springs into the garden. It's angry at God. It's angry at humanity. And it wants to undo everything beautiful that God has done. So he dupes the humans to reject God's ways through a tricky conversation, which leads these first humans to eat of a forbidden tree, and what was good begins to immediately circle the drain. And now enter into creation. Pain, suffering, separation, loneliness, despair, imperfection, brokenness, God's perfect creation, and ultimately it also has the equation death. So, is God going to wipe out the whole creation, start over, and do it again because this one didn't work out? Or is he going to fix it? Well, obviously he'd fix the second one or we wouldn't be having this conversation. He decides that he's going to work to redeem what humanity has broken at his own expense. And in chapter 3, we're already starting to get a sense of how this is going to work out. There's going to be a redeemer. Well, unfortunately, the book doesn't get a lot brighter as it goes along. It's all about humanity being unable to get out of its own way. This sin thing, this failure thing, it's a disease, and it's on all of us, and everybody seems to struggle with it. And the further we get into the book, the more we realize that we really do need that redeemer to show up as soon as possible. Then in chapter 12, the story starts to crystallize as we meet this guy, Abram, whose name later becomes Abraham, and we find out that God picked this fellow out of the clear blue sky. It was like, you, right there, I pick you for no apparent reason. You're going to be my guy, and you're going to have a ton of descendants. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to make you into this great nation, and I'm going to bless you, and all of the nations are going to be blessed through you. So we're learning a little bit more about this redemptive plan. It's going to run through Abraham and his descendants. But then through the rest of the book of Genesis, we follow this guy's family, and they're a mess. I mean, they get some stuff right, and that's cool, but they get a ton of stuff wrong. And I don't mean a little bit wrong. I mean darkly wrong. But there is one thing that even in the clumsiest of ways, Abraham and many of these descendants seem to get right, and that is that they believe God, and somehow God credits that to them as righteousness. That might not make total sense when you just look at Genesis, but it's a thread that runs through the whole Bible, and it'll come into focus more later on. The book ends with Abraham's descendants in the wrong country, in the wrong context. It looks like everything's out of place for the redemptive plan to keep working, but this is the God who's in charge of everything and made everything and is daunted by nothing, and the plan is not going to be derailed. So the attentive reader will turn the page from the end of Genesis over to the beginning of Exodus, not knowing exactly how God is going to pull this off, but fully expecting, based on his track record, that he will. In the book of Genesis, we get the genesis of existence, we get the genesis of humanity, we get the genesis of the human problem, we get the genesis of God's redemptive plan, and all of those loose ends that are hanging out there as we wrap up this book are going to get paid off as we go through the rest of the Bible.